Hi, this is Shubham Tiwari.
Hi, this is Rangan.
Welcome to the Salespanel podcast, where we bring to you the journeys and playbooks of thought leaders from the B2B world. Tune in for all the things on data-driven marketing, product-led growth, and customer intelligence. Moving on with today's episode, our guest today is an accomplished marketer who loves to build impossible to ignore brands. He's the Chief Marketing Officer, best known for building Wendy's digital and social. He's a board member at Chamber Media and has previously worked with Papa John's International as the Global Chief Marketing Officer, among many other roles at other organizations. Brendan Rhoten, welcome to Salespanel.
Thanks for having me.
So to continue with your introduction in a question, so you were previously, where you've led marketing for several leading brands with longer tenures, but now you're working as a fractional CMO. So can you tell us what you aim to accomplish for brands serving as a fractional CMO?
Yeah, so when COVID hit, a lot of friends had their brands kind of upturned. Either tons of business came rolling in because what they were doing was really important during COVID, or their business sort of collapsed. So I had a bunch of friends reach out asking for help. They didn't have access to large consultancies like BCG or McKinsey. They didn't have usually deep marketing teams. They needed to rebuild their brand for kind of a new world. So that's what I've been doing. I've been helping friends for about the last year and a half rework their brands so they could either survive COVID or take advantage of the opportunity it's presented. So basically my sort of outlined procedure is I work with them to figure out what the problem is, try to identify how we fix the problem, ultimately usually reposition the brand or reposition the pitch for the brand, and then and help them get growing again so they can thrive in these crazy new times we're in.
So you had a very small window, I think, like when you work with brands for longer periods, you have a long time to play the role, but in a short span, you had a limited scope. So you had to do things fast and move things.
You got to learn how to build teams quick. You got to learn how to launch programs quick. You got to test and bob and weave pretty fast to get everything done. And ultimately you have to show results within, a few months versus a year or so, like you do in a normal CMO role. So it's very different, but I'm learning a lot, especially about smaller companies right now.
Cool. So we had a follow-up question on that, but we would get back to that later. So we had more interesting things to talk about first. So for our audience, I would like to emphasize that Brandon served as the VP of Advertising, Media and Digital for Wendy's, joining back in 2011. And he was the first marketing hire for the company, and he built their whole digital presence from scratch. And I'm not exaggerating here, he really did. And if you see funny tweets from Wendy's, I wonder who kickstarted all of this, it's this guy basically. And even in countries where Wendy's is not selling their products, people know about the brand. So Brandon, can you tell us important bits from your Wendy's journey? How did you build their digital footprint?
Yeah, so I got to give credit to the management of Wendy's. A new CEO came in 2011 and wanted to revamp the brand, wanted to bring it back to sort of its roots as a challenger brand, and tasked me with building out the digital function at Wendy's. So it took a year and a half to get the team right, to get the budget right, to test what the voice would be, to figure out exactly how to get some attention for the brand using digital and social marketing. And ultimately, once it started to work, because I think it was so different than everyone else in the category and everyone else probably in the world, it sort of caught fire. And that led to them giving me more to do. So eventually I started running, all advertising for the brand, but digital and social were kind of the core of the new attitude for the marketing and the brand. But it took, a couple of years to get it right. And it took, a lot of testing, a lot of learning, a lot of partnerships with platforms, and frankly, a lot of bravery from our board, from our management team. The people in place today are still in place because of that bravery. So they're still killing it today. I'm very proud of the legacy behind there, and very proud of the team that's still in place. That's still doing awesome work every day.
Great. So talking about branding, Steve Jobs once made an infamous speech, the speech that he made when he launched the Think Different ad. So he walked on the stage wearing shorts and sandals, and he just said, marketing is about values. And that speech is really one of the greatest things I have ever heard. So now you have led digital marketing for several multi-billion-dollar companies like Papa John's and Wendy's. You have also led marketing for Potbelly sandwich. So at the end of the day, these are all fast food companies, right? Like, I'm not trying to be judgmental here, but it is what is. They're fast food companies. So going back to the Steve Jobs speech, he gave an example of Nike. He said Nike is a brand that sells shoes, and yet when you think about Nike, you feel something different. You think of a brand that honors great athletes. So coming back to my question, how did you brand these fast food companies to help customers relate with them and make them stand out? How did you make the customers feel different about these brands?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously have to tell people what you sell, so they do have to be aware that they can buy something from you.
Yeah.
But I agree 100% with Steve Jobs. When you boil it down, I mean, everyone does, right?
Yeah.
But when you boil it down, people have a lot of choices. They can choose from many different products in every category. So they oftentimes align with the brands that they feel that give them an emotional pull that represent something bigger and more interesting to them. Wendy's is a great example, right? Sells cheeseburgers. At the time when I joined, it was the third largest cheeseburger company in the world. McDonald's was one, Burger King was two. When I left, we were number two. And part of the reason we were number two is because we didn't just align with, relatively inexpensive hamburgers. We were a challenger brand. So our brand was all about pushing the whole industry to be better. The programs that did really well, like our Twitter presence, like our video efforts that won Lions and Effies and all sorts of awards, were all about pushing the industry to be better. When we picked a fight with Burger King on Twitter, it wasn't just to be interesting. It was also to push them to say, hey, you should do better than what you're doing. You should serve fresh beef. You should, make your burgers like this, not like that. So Wendy's represented a challenger brand. That was the core sort of emotional pull. Went to Papa John's, and really the positioning there was about better pizza. When you get down to it, you got to eat the thing you get. And if you don't respect that thing a little bit, it's not just about distribution. Domino's whole thing is they get you the pizza with technology. That's awesome, but you still got to eat the thing. So, better pizza represents kind of a standard that you have, a quality standard. So an assumption that it means more to you to have better food and better ingredients. So that was the positioning there that ultimately was around that better and sort of reaching higher value. When you go to Potbelly is very different than everyone else in the sandwich space. Jimmy John's is about fast, getting you out the door. Subway is about cheap, or used to be about cheap. Now they're trying to figure out what they're about. All these guys have a niche, but the niche that no one was grabbing was really the experience of actually going to a restaurant and sitting down and enjoying your lunch. So what Potbelly grabbed was actually a moment of break, of respite, of the deserved break in the middle of the day that you've earned as someone who needs to, sit down and actually chill out after your, in the middle of the day for your stressful job. So I do agree 100%. You have to stand for something much bigger than what you sell, but what you sell has to be represented by those values. And that's what we tried to do at all three brands that I was leading marketing for.
Yeah, I think these brands have, their own unique identity, and people kind of associate with them with something like Starbucks, for example. It's just coffee, but when people go to Starbucks, some people would just take the laptops with them, and they would just work there, sitting there.
Yeah, I would argue Starbucks is a status symbol now. They started with third place, this idea that, just like you said, they started with this idea that this is your office away from the office, a place for a quiet, time to write or whatever it is you're going to do today that requires you to focus and get away, but still be connected. And now I think they've moved to more of a status symbol. When you walk around with a Starbucks logo, it means something to people. It's a bit like a Cadillac or Lexus badge on a car. It represents something bigger.
Yeah. So the thing you guys did with Wendy's Twitter, all those roasts and rivalries and cheeky comments, that gimmick is risky to say the least. But now, since that works so well, many brands are trying to do the similar things, being human, being empathetic, being funny. But brands have already beaten this idea to death by now. So when you guys did it, it was unique, but now it's not anymore. So My question to you is how can brands come up with unique and crazy ideas like this, and what should be the starting point for them?
Yes. So I think you got to start with two simple things. Who is your target? And what are your brand values that you want to represent? What's the positioning you want to put in the world?
Yeah.
You know, the reason we did what we did was our brand values were around challenging the industry to be better. And our target, the people we were seeking, were people spending their times on social platforms like Twitter. So you have to decide those two things first. Once you've decided those, then you can figure out how you're actually going to be interesting to your target within that ecosystem, whatever platform you're going to be, experimenting with. When you get down to it, you said it, we were one of the first to do what we did. It got a lot of attention. A lot of people have knocked it off, but they've still continued to evolve. So I would look at Wendy's actually as an example. And I haven't been any part of this work. So this is just them still being awesome. They've evolved to where they're heavily involved in gaming. I think gaming is a huge forefront that most most brands, period, but especially most food aren't seriously engaged in. They've got a huge presence in places like Fortnite and in the metaverse and in all these new places, because again, it still is true to the core. So what that brand knows, what that team still knows, is their target is spending time in those places, and they can express that challenger value in them. So I think if you want an example of a company that, how to figure out what the next big thing is, you actually look at the companies that are evolving how they participate in marketing. Nike's done that. Apple's done that. McDonald's is doing that. All sorts of brands now are evolving those core values, that positioning, and where their target spends time. But you got to start with your target and what your positioning is, what your values are as a brand. If you're not true to that, it's not going to stick, and you're not going to be consistent. So it's not actually going to work.
Right. So Wendy's has been around since the 60s, and Papa John's and Potbelly sandwich, they have been around, since 80s. So these brands have thousands of employees and are already established global brands. So how does a marketing leader like you bring major changes to these huge corporations? Like you already told what happened in the Wendy's. I would like to know more about how you bring these changes.
So usually when a brand calls me, they want to change. So typically there's a desire from upper management, from the board, from the organization to evolve in some way. Now, oftentimes they don't know exactly how they want to change, but they know they want to change. There's some symptom in the business that says they need to change. Traffic is declining, average check is declining, frequency of use is declining, their demographics are aging out. There's some symptom that says we need help, we need to fix something about our business, and we think this is a potential route to fix it. So usually there's a willingness that helps a lot. It's like any change that needs to happen, right? You got to accept it yourself before you can actually make the change. If you're going to start exercising, buying the treadmill is a big step forward to say, I'm going to start exercising, or getting the gym membership or whatever. So there's a willingness, number one. Number two, I think I've learned to be patient but persistent, where I can work with an organization and build teams that work with an organization. So it's certainly not just me, it's the people around me that ultimately can show the benefit of the change. At most of the brands I went to, there was no budget, there was no team associated with this change. It was just, let's bring Brandon in and see if we can figure it out. And he can figure it out, frankly. So I think you have to be patient, and you have to show the progress that the change actually provides. At most of these brands, I could demonstrate the demographics are starting to shift in our customer base. The traffic is changing in our customer base. You can run tests, pre-post meta control tests that show versus the control, we're seeing a traffic increase, or we're seeing a change in check, or whatever the variable is you're attempting to affect on the back end. Everybody understands their P&L. So if you can actually use the lagging indicators like your traffic or your sales as drivers that underscore the value of the change that the organization wants to make anyway, it's actually not that hard. It's easier said than done, and it takes time. So it doesn't take one quarter. It takes a couple of quarters really to get that rolling in a big organization. It's a year plus oftentimes. But once people start to witness the change, it's kind of a snowball effect. It gets easier as you go.
Yeah, so I had a follow-up question on that. So many marketing activities, they can't directly be connected to revenue, right? So when marketing leaders are making those things, for example, like if you are advertising on Fortnite, how do you know how that's directly connecting to revenue? So how do marketing leaders convince their board or their CEO about these things?
Well, this is a complicated topic, but let me break it down into a couple pieces. One, I would argue any marketer worth their salt is building a program that has attributable variables and media and non-attributable variables in media. So typically you build a calendar with two layers. One's a performance layer that you can guarantee, you give me $1 CFO, I'm going to give you back 3 or 4. And I can show that through the marketing attribution tools that are in place, through an MMA, through an MTA, through whatever the acronym you want to grab is that helps you actually attribute dollars. That becomes the core of your plan because it's what guarantees business flowing in. Then you usually have a brand building layer that's more about the softer metrics. So this is things like, I want to shift my demographic. This is things like, I want to change the perception of the brand in a positive way. These are things like awareness that take time to build. So you create a layer that guarantees results, and then you create a layer that ultimately takes several quarters to actually manifest in attributable results, but they're soft. They're not P&L level results. So they're not the kind of thing you can report to the board as, I helped save the quarter, or, next quarter will be better because the numbers are looking good on our media buy. They're the things that say, well, this is the long-term, effort that we have in play to fix the brand. So I think you need layers. That's the short answer. The more kind of succinct answer would be, when you get down to it, I think you can measure everything in marketing. It's all about the window of measurement. It's about the time. So if you do a pre-post and a control study over 3 years, you can measure serious brand changes that happen and the effect on the business. Look at Papa John's, a great example, right? I was only at Papa John's for a year. In that year, I implemented a lot of change. It's change that I think they've benefited from, but ultimately you have to really look at that year in context of 3 years. And I wasn't there for 3 years to understand the magnitude of change that's happened at that brand because of the people now running it and because of the change I helped kick off. So I do think every major, consistent, well thought out strategy in marketing is measurable. The question is it a performance layer that you measure in months or weeks, or is it a brand layer that you measure in quarters or years? And you just have to have the appropriate tools in place to measure and the appropriate horizon to measure that change in. People are just impatient. So they want to see the change next week, which you can get with your Facebook buy, but you can't necessarily get it with, we're changing the creative, or we're changing the brand position, or something much more significant than, a tweak to your performance media plan.
Right. So speaking more about branding, Brandon, what are your major tips to make a brand impossible to ignore?
Yeah, you got to understand your positioning and values. You got to understand your target. I ask 3 very specific questions whenever I review any piece of creative, any piece of brand building. Number 1 is, what's the one thing you're trying to say? I think a lot of brands try to stuff a million messages into every communication. You got to stand for one thing. Nike is athleticism. End of story. It's what they are, right? I'd argue Apple is simplicity of design. That's it. That's what they are. Now, that doesn't mean they can't come out with products that whatever, but they all have to represent that value, that position. So I'd argue Wendy's is challenger. That's what they are. So you have to define the one thing you're trying to be. And in each communication, you're trying to communicate. There's context you can put in there that creates cues that, make you feel something that's, pushing you one direction or another, but one thing. So what's the one thing is one question I ask without question whenever I look at a brand, whenever I look at a piece of creative. The second question I have is, will the target care? That's really important. It implies a few things. One, you understand the target. who they are, what they want, how they make decisions, all that important stuff. And then will they care means, is it interesting to them? Are they actually going to pay attention? You are bombarded with millions of brand messages a day. I mean, they're all over the place. It's happening right now as we sit here on my back wall. It's just you're being bombarded by brand messaging all the time. So in order to actually break through and be noticed by your target, you have to understand the target and understand what interests them. So number one is, what's the one thing you're trying to say? And two, will the target care? The third thing is, does it build the brand? And that really orients around, ultimately, when you are trying to actually put creative in the world, when you are building a brand, you have to make sure you understand your values, you understand your positioning. So are you actually furthering that positioning with that communication, with that brand building effort? I think a lot of people will do things because they're fun, they're interesting, they'll maybe get headlines, they'll maybe get attention. But if it fundamentally doesn't build up those values, doesn't make the positioning stronger, I would put your priorities elsewhere. So I ask the simple answer is, I ask three very simple questions whenever I look at an execution or even look at a brand building exercise, to ensure that I'm 100% aligned that it's got the best shot of working as possible.
So Brendan, speaking of your fractional CMO role again, so when you join a team as a fractional CMO, how do you set up your team? How do you hire?
Yeah, so it really depends on what the brand needs. In some cases, it's very clear. They're struggling down funnel to convert. You need a team for UX folks for the site, and you need a CRM team to help, make the bottom of the funnel sing. Sometimes they have an awareness issue, so you need to reposition the brand, and you need to build out media and something to actually create awareness. And then you build a media team, or you build a strategy team in some cases. A lot of times small companies can't hire almost anybody. So it's a function of, I have an awesome Rolodex of great partners that I can pull in a CRM partner that can start tomorrow and can execute the bottom side of the funnel, and I know will increase conversion. I've got a list of awesome performance marketing agencies that I know will drive D2C transactions and immediately get the business moving from the bottom line. So it really depends on what the brand needs, but I'm a big fan of keeping it lean, using partners whenever you can, and only hiring when you know you're not going to have to fire somebody. So I do not like hiring somebody on a whim. I like hiring somebody because I know this is going to be an area of focus for a while. It's really important. Somebody's got to own it and be accountable for it. And I'm confident that if we bring this person in, they're going to actually further our goals. So it really depends. I've gone into teams where I've hired 5 or 6 people almost immediately. I've gone into teams where it's been a year and it's just been me and partners. Right. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah, so you have when you work as a fractional CMO, you have a short span, and like even people you hire, they would be there in the company before, even after you leave. So you have to set that role up accordingly.
Exactly right. You are there temporarily to help set up something, whatever that thing is, or solve a problem. And then you have to let the bull roll past you. And I'd argue it's not that different as a CMO. I mean, fractional CMO, sure, you might be there 6 months or a year, but the average CMO tenure is like 2.5 years. So, you're kind of doing that as a CMO all the time. Your window is just a little shorter potentially as a fractional CMO.
Right. So our product Salespanel is a B2B software, and most of our audience comprises of B2B marketing leaders or operation managers. So now the opportunities for social media marketing for B2B and B2C are very different. Like on B2C, you have a very vast audience, but B2B companies have a limited audience, and they often tend to see social media as an afterthought. What would you suggest to these brands?
Yeah, so it's no different than B2C. It's just you're more niche, right? But niches are where social media and the internet thrives. If you're into fountain pens, you're going to find a huge community of fountain pen people. There are more people that need your software than are probably looking for fountain pens today. So I would argue it doesn't really matter anymore. You just have to find the niche. Where are people making decisions and talking about and trying to figure out whether they need your stuff? Where are they trying to solve the problems that you solve? So I don't think it's actually different today. The internet has blown up niches where niches are all that matter. I mean, look at Netflix. You can watch a show about such a minute topic. It is crazy now. Never would have that been produced for television 20 years ago. I think it's the same way in marketing. So just find the niche, find out where the target is, where they spend their time, and then put your brand forward in a way that's compelling to them in that platform.
Right. So, I mean, you're very, very bullish on video marketing. Can you share some tips on how brands can, lay the groundwork for creating a successful video marketing strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to start with that stuff we talked about before. Who's your target? What's your, positioning? So what's those values that you hold up? What's that thing you stand for? Then you have to decide if video is a compelling way to actually sell your product. In many cases it is, because video is such a, immersive experience. I'd also argue the platforms available to you for video are extremely strong right now. Between YouTube and Instagram Reels and TikTok, the world is, and even connected TV, the world for video is thriving right now. The brands I'm working with that are using video are doing so extremely successfully in most cases. So determine your target, determine your values, and then figure out which platform you're going to play in. Because when you get down to it, you're going to produce for the platform primarily. TikTok is different than connected TV, which is different than YouTube. So you're going to have to decide where is your target, and therefore how will you actually position and produce the content you need to produce to be successful in that platform. So, so make those brand decisions first, and then make the platform decision, and then start producing for the platform in a way that's going to be interesting to your audience, which is actually the hardest part of the whole thing. You got to figure out what is the compelling message that is going to attract people to your brand. I have found the easiest way to do that is give away the good stuff. If you talk about the stuff that everybody wants to hear, that normally people are guarded about discussing, they're interested. Tell them how to solve their problems and be open and transparent. And usually they want to give you their money. They want to actually do business with you because they start seeing you as a trusted partner in solving their problem versus as a vendor that's just trying to pitch them something.
Right. And speaking of, one of your key skills, you're good at influencing organizations to, modernize marketing, because you recently talked about how TikTok is a serious medium of marketing in a podcast, another podcast. So you did that for Wendy's and several other companies. For young marketing leaders who are trying to modernize marketing for legacy companies, what would you suggest?
Yeah, figure out the fundamental problems that you need to solve for that brand. People like to chase shiny objects, and sometimes that's okay, but it has to be in service to the bigger problem. Fundamentally, if I would have gone into any of these brands just pitching the shiny thing, let's do TikTok. Why? Without a why, without a serious business problem underneath it, it's really hard to convince an organization to make any serious change. Your CFO, your CEO does not care about likes, does not care about views, does not care about your follower count. They don't care about any of that stuff. They don't care about impressions in PR. What they care about is, are you solving the core issues of the business? So I think it's a marketer's job to first understand the business and how the business needs to evolve in order to actually improve. When I go into a brand, I don't talk about platforms. I talk about the demographics we need to pursue based on what the data is saying of where our traffic is falling off. Or I talk about how we can grow check by doing X, Y, and Z, and then the tactic comes. A lot of people start with tactic or platform or shiny object, and it just doesn't work. Most organizations do not care. They care about the business results. So if you ground yourself in the business and the problems you're solving in the business, and then you use those things that will be beneficial to those solving those problems, you are light years ahead of everyone else, because most people do not think that way. They think very tactically. You ask them, hey, what should we do about X? They don't ask you a single question. If they're in PR, they throw out a press release is what you should do. If they're in social, they'll throw out TikTok or Twitter. They'll immediately give you like every problem is a nail when all you have is a hammer kind of thing. Right. You have to actually start with what are the problems you're trying to solve and then build from there.
Right. So speaking of, the future, I mean, we are living in uncertain times, but of course, we have to be positive about things. So, what future advancements you are excited about in terms of brand marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI has a ridiculous amount of possibility to help build funnels, execute much more effective performance marketing, get us out of this world where cookies were a thing and then now are a problem. And now, AI has got the capability to be a media manager on steroids 24 hours a day. So that's really exciting to me to see automated media buying, automated positioning of media within platforms. Super exciting to see the companies that are embracing that and really digging into how do I automate my media process in a way that's responsible, because you can't let the bots take over. I think is really exciting. I think these changes that are coming, and I'm not necessarily a big proponent necessarily of the metaverse, but the Web3 possibilities are ridiculous.
Yeah,
When you
it's
add
very exciting.
ownership and like the deep capabilities that are possible in blockchain to the equation, I mean, just everything starts to change. I don't even think people are, and it's not just crypto, it's not just all that stuff. Those are all just kind of little early stage stuff here. But if you can actually sell something that has more inherent and long-term value, not just a JPEG of a monkey, which I don't beat up, Bored Ape, but something that's actually deeper. I've got a buddy who launched a motorcycle, and when he launched the motorcycle, what he did was he launched an NFT with it, and the NFT included every bit that you needed to build that motorcycle from scratch.
Wow.
Everything was in that NFT. So you bought the motorcycle, but you bought the NFT. So you could make as many of the motorcycles as you wanted. You bought the rights to produce the motorcycle from every base component. That's just such a different way to think. You're not buying a product. You're actually buying a line of products that you could technically rebuild and resell. You're buying a business as you're buying a motorcycle. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, that's hugely powerful. So just the possibilities of Web3, of AI are insane. And I think the folks that are, doubting it because these early days aren't as, flashy or don't have that depth to it are the same folks that back in the day when social was first starting coming out were like, well, this isn't going anywhere. TV's the only thing we need to worry about. And what's going to happen is in 2 or 3 years, or maybe sooner, people are going to be like, whoa, I could be doing it this way. And this opens up so many possibilities for what my business is, for what my model is, for how I measure things, for how I'm running a program. It's just super exciting. Super exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, brands are doing, I think, a lot with NFTs right now. Like for games, you can have special things, special items, even for companies like collectibles, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's super cool stuff. And I would argue it's all right now just scratching the surface. It's just experimentation. But that's how you start, right? You start by experimenting, figuring out what people actually want out of this thing. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, with the housing thing that's going on right now. I would love to buy an NFT for my house that has every single component of my house outlined. So if I ever need to figure out how my irrigation system works, it's in this thing that then if I sell it, it's completely transferable and it's always out there and I can't lose it. And I can't break it. And it's just the possibilities are crazy. And endless. The brands that are starting to play there, I think Pepsi's a good example of a brand that's starting to play there and getting into some interesting stuff, but just scratching the surface. They're using the novelty of it right now. The utility of it is what's really exciting and will become a big thing in the next few years.
It's wonderful. So many opportunities in the offing. And Brandon, you've been working as a fractional CMO for like 2 years now. So what's next for you?
Yeah, so I'm trying to decide whether I want to go back into the full-time CMO swing. I've got a few companies that have been reaching out to me, over the last few months, asking for that sort of thing. Or if I want to keep helping people like I'm helping them. I'm having a blast doing what I'm doing. So I really don't know yet. I love owning a brand. I love end to end being able to, hold up a team and send them to France to pick up a lion for a creative execution they did. And I love representing a brand like publicly and being able to talk about how this brand is killing it and doing great work. But at the same time, I love new stuff all the time. So I'm not sure yet, but over probably the summer, I'm going to make a decision of whether I want to settle in somewhere or whether I want to kind of keep doing what I've been doing for the last year and a half-ish.
Right. Wonderful. So, Brandon, since we are, at the fag end of this interview, we have, we ask these questions regarding, when, we meet a wise guy. I know like wise guy, has multiple meanings in America. But when we meet a wise guy, we, ask them what books do they read. So can you tell us what, kind of books you like and what you're reading nowadays?
Yeah. So I do read a lot of business books. I read a lot of business actually about artificial intelligence. Life 3.0 is a great book that I have on my shelf right now that I'm just started. I love reading the old advertising books like, I got a pretty big shelf all the way back here, but like Truth, Lies, and Advertising is amazing. The book Positioning is amazing. I actually love digging into the older advertising stuff just because the fundamentals are still true. The techniques might change of research, of media, but the techniques are still true. And then I read a lot about small businesses, about direct-to-consumer businesses, about businesses that I don't have as much exposure to. So I can, or I didn't used to before I started doing what I've been doing for the last year or two. So I can kind of catch up in what are they doing? Obviously I understand bigger business because I work there. I understand the QSR space, the fast food space, the restaurant space because I work there. But it lets me kind of quickly learn what I need to learn about things like automatic payments and building a startup and building a business to sell and all the things that the people I'm working with now over the last year or two are really interested in. I cannot be on a plane without a book, and I fly quite a bit. So I read a lot, mostly on planes. I do have a 3-year-old, so I don't get to read a whole lot at home, but while I'm traveling, I usually read a book on the way and read a book on the way back because these books usually aren't very hard to knock out.
Wonderful, cool.
Yeah, so I think about old advertising books. Have you read the material from Eugene Schwartz? I think Breakthrough Advertising or Brilliance Breakthrough.
Yeah, I have not read that. I've actually heard of it. It's in my Amazon list to buy, and I haven't bought it yet. So I'm going to buy it right after this call because that sounds like a good plane read right there.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's great.
Yeah, good stuff. I appreciate the suggestion.
So, Brandon, last question, rather another ritual. Would you like to nominate anyone for the show, for our show? Wonderful show that we have.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends obviously in marketing. So I'll and in brand building, I'll reach out specifically to a friend of mine, Katie Woolrick, who she runs marketing for a big hotel chain and a restaurant chain. She is one of the people I've worked with the longest and think she's amazing as a marketer. So I think she would add a lot of value to this discussion if she's willing to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brandon, for this wonderful, fun, insightful conversation. I hope you enjoyed and, we asked you all the right questions. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thanks to our audience for sticking with us. We'll see you in the next episode. Till then, please be safe and take care.